Well, thanks, first of all, for having us. So every single summer, my family and I, we go to up to the mountains, and it's about a 13-hour trip, and so we'll start from our house. We'll start driving. We'll start going down the freeway about 85 miles an hour. Now, before you judge me, the posted speed limits are 85 miles an hour. So we have a pretty fast ability to get up there. And so it takes about 13 hours. And so whenever we were first going there, we're traveling down the freeway. And then we'll start getting to when we start getting to the mountains, we're going to start getting up with stop signs, stop lights. We have a few school zones we have to go through, and so it takes a lot longer once we start getting off of the freeway and start moving to get closer onto there. And so what we're going to talk about is a little bit compared to what that is. But before I get too far along, I like polling the audience. Who all here, just raise your hand, are developers? Okay. Testers? All right. Do we have any architects here? Okay. Managers? Okay, awesome. And then Scrum Masters, project managers? Okay, cool. So we have a pretty wide variety, which is great. Every time we give our talks, we like to make sure that the content isn't just specific to whatever people are talking to, but it also is applicable in whatever job you may have. So that's why I always like to kind of understand what that is. Next slide. I don't know what. There we go. Oh, OK. So for those of you that don't know who USAA is, which is an organization we're from, essentially we are a financial services company that supports the military and their family. And so some of the products that we have is we have banking products, investment products. We have insurance products, which means we're highly regulated. And we'll get into that and how the freeway may impact that in a little bit. But you'll see on the USAA standard, we want to keep our membership and mission first. And so it's really important to us when you think about quality and building out quality applications, as well as making sure we have a maintainable set of tools that we're able to do that. And so that's kind of how we fit into that picture. So a little bit about myself. Essentially, I've got about 15 years of experience. I started out as a developer. I moved into application architecture, where I supported actually a few of our different line of business bank applications. And then recently I moved into the testing infrastructure space. And so from the perspective of, we have about 5,000 or 6,000 developers and testers that we support. And so my role essentially is supporting that amount of tools and capabilities that we provide. So I'm not embedded within individual teams. I'm actually overseeing all of the development tools from across all of the SDLC tools and capabilities, as well as all the various technology stacks. So as you can imagine, that's a pretty broad base that we have. And I'm going to let Chris introduce himself real quick.
Without getting feedback. All right. So I'm Chris Nelson. I started my career many years ago as a mainframe application developer. And I've been with USAA for almost 12 years now. I spent the bulk of that time on the mainframe platform, doing primarily CI/CS and batch development. I moved over to the distributed side of the house about 3 years ago when I was offered the opportunity to tech lead a Java batch effort. That was very eye-opening. And then I've been on the current position on the infrastructure testing team with Brian for the last 2 years.
OK, thanks, Chris. So typically when I talk to various organizations, I see two different usages of tools in an organization, and kind of continue to use the freeway analogy. And I'm interested in what you guys have at your organizations. So how many, if you would say, in your organization have more of any tool you want, you can download it, you can use it? Raise your hand. OK. Any of you guys support those tools? No? OK, so you can use whatever you want. And then if you run into problems, I guess you just can go find help where you want. Chris will talk about that because he's on the support team that would have to support whatever tools we bring in. And then how many of you have this, one-way detour, only use one tool? OK. All right, good. So we kind of have both of that. And I think there's pros and cons to that, as well as just in general, anytime there's a certain approach or framework that you have in your organization, and maybe you don't like it, just remember to have empathy and understand maybe why that decision was made. A lot of times you'll have someone that'll come to you and say, well, that was stupid. Why did they make that decision? It's most likely not that the person that made the decision wasn't very intelligent. They probably had certain risks or things they were trying to manage. And so whenever you do start a conversation with someone when you're trying to accomplish something, whether it's security, compliance, whatever, I always like to start with, well, what's the reason or the root cause of what you're trying to accomplish? Not just say, I don't like what you're doing. And so that's a good way to start the conversation. So instead of switching from only having one tool that you're utilizing or having multiple tools, what if it looked more like this? And so it's a little bit hard to read probably, but you can see this is your freeway analogy we're talking about. And so when you stay on the freeway and certain tools that you would utilize, essentially you would have training, continuous integration, hooks, reporting, et cetera. And so if a team within an organization decides they want to use a tool that we provide on the freeway, what that means is we're going to provide each of those capabilities. But if you decide, I really don't want to use this tool, in our organization, that's okay. But what that means is you have the responsibility of setting it up and configuring it within your application, within the CI pipeline, as well as the big thing for us is reporting and audit, right? So when your auditors or reporters, compliance come in and they say, okay, help me understand what you're doing as a part of your SDLC. Well, if you're not using the Freeway tools, you're on your own to kind of explain what that might be. And so that may be scary for you. That may be something you want to do. And so that's something. The other thing you may notice here is there's a dead end, right? So what if I pick a tool that really isn't as good as I thought it was? Well, now I've got to start back over and decide, do I get back on the freeway or do I stay off, as well as training, et cetera. So those are all the different capabilities that we have. So another way to look at it, if I can get the next slide. Okay, thank you. Is if you look at the Freeway from the perspective of, here's some examples of what we use. We call our test infrastructure Freeway. So you'll see for ReadyAPI, we use it for API testing, performance testing, and security testing. And then we have other tools we utilize for that. And so one of the things I loved about a couple of the keynotes from the product team was this open integration. And so what we focus on is best-in-class tool integration, not all-in-one solution. And so what we want to make sure is when we are building that integration into the Freeway, that these tools are seamlessly integrated. And so if you're using one of these tools, you already have those hooks in. But then you see we depicted this dirt road that you go onto, right? And so if you decide that you want to use a different tool, you find an open source tool that just is amazing for your team. It could be that the team has a unique use case, and so it doesn't make sense. And so then that means that, okay, well, now I'm going to get off of the freeway, and I'm going to be going on to my own dirt road. Next slide. So what does the Freeway provide? And so I talked about this, but essentially, if we provide a tool that's on the freeway, what we're doing is we're saying we're going to provide you training, which means helping you kind of get up and running, get quickly going up there. Support, so if I run into a problem, we still encourage you, go look on Stack Overflow, Google something, whatever. But if you really start running into problems and you can't solve the problem, not only do we support you, but our team is skilled in that because they have a limited set of tools that they're utilizing. And then what I like to say is quick time to hello world. So making sure if I want to start running an application quickly and I want to hook it in the pipeline, this is the quickest way to get on the freeway, and the quick time to hello world is by utilizing that. And then also the big thing for us, again, is reporting and compliance. And so we already have the hooks into it. We've got the dashboard so our executive leaders can see the test results, et cetera. And then whenever we're talking and we want to walk through with our regulators how our process is going, we can show them within that tool. So we talked at a high level, if you go to the next slide, about this is what the Freeway provides, but then you may start saying, well, let's dive a little bit deeper and understand what happens if I build a new test capability or migrate to another tool. Well, that's okay. All that means is we say, okay, well, this was the tool that we were using for the Freeway. Now we're going to be adding another one. But what's important to that is we typically will retire the other tool and no longer have the support for that. But then that means now our support teams need to make sure that we have the hooks into CI integration, we have the training, we have the support, et cetera. And so we don't declare something a new Freeway tool until we feel like we're ready to support that. And oftentimes that maybe another team may be using it, or maybe another team builds something useful that other teams can use. And so then they may say, well, we want to get on the freeway. Another kind of entrance that we expect in the freeway is if you build this amazing tool, but no one else in your organization wants to use it, probably means it doesn't need to be a freeway tool. But if there's lots of teams that use it, then we can do that. And then the next thing is, well, what happens if there's a specific tool that's required, if you go back one slide, that's required for regulatory or other reasons? That's okay. Just think about a freeway. So if you're trying to go over a river, or in this case, when I came in here, I thought there'd be a bridge I'd go over, but I went underneath the river. That's the only way that you can get underneath the river or across where you're trying to accomplish. And so that's the same thing. That's what we do for our testing results, because it goes to our executive leaders. There's a certain testing tool that you have to hook it into to send all your results to. And so that's a way that you can say, well, you have the freedom in this case, but for this particular use case, you have to change that. So the next slide that we're going to go to is kind of wrapping up my portion of it, and then Chris is going to talk specifically about how we utilize that. But essentially, think about within your organization why they're deciding to do either something what you may feel is too strict or too loose. Have empathy for that. Consider utilizing the freeway analogy for that. Understand that the freeway provides balance and room and experimentation and control where needed. So it provides a flexibility not only for the team that's going to try and experiment, and we encourage that. It also helps the team that's doing the support to do that, as well as when you start looking at, with anything that you're doing, you want to roll things out incrementally, right? So you want to take the crawl, walk, run, which means start something small, pilot it, make sure it works well, and then start running from there. And I'm going to hand it over to Chris.
Which one is the slide? This one?
That one.
You can go to the next. There we go. Okay, so again, I work on one of the infrastructure teams that's responsible for implementing the testing infrastructure at the freeway infrastructure at USAA. We're the team that really makes Brian's dreams and visions a reality. So I want to talk just a little bit about what that process involves. So the first thing that we do is we work really closely with our customers, and in this case, it's our development community of 5,000 some developers. And we need to understand what their use cases are and really what problem they're trying to solve. And then next, we work with our technical architecture team to help research the available tools for that to solve that specific problem. And then we'll bring in one or maybe a few tools to do a proof of concept. And this one is really important because it gets our team hands-on with the tool, and it gets the developers hands-on so they can run some real-world use cases through the tool and really vet it out. And then once a decision is made on a tool, a specific tool, or maybe a couple of tools, as Brian alluded to, our team is also responsible for a full professional enterprise installation, as well as all of the training material, the wikis, the videos, you name it. And then finally, we have a dedicated support team that's available 24/7 to answer any problems that the user may have with the tool. All right, so who benefits? We clearly think that the developer benefits because they essentially get a turnkey solution that's going to answer most, if not all, of their use cases. And then, well, selfishly, my team, the infrastructure team that's implementing this, benefits because now we have a chance to really focus our time, attention, and talents on a manageable set of some really great tools. All right, so speaking of really great tools, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to demonstrate the most recent addition to our enterprise freeway, which is ReadyAPI. We specifically chose ReadyAPI because, as Brian mentioned, it met a lot of our requirements for functional security and performance testing, and it was in a nice package as well. I'm not going to go into the details on how to use ReadyAPI because there's a whole bunch of other people that can do that a whole lot better than I can. What we want to focus on specifically is how we have integrated it into our GitLab CI/CD pipeline. All right, so if you can start the video. I recorded it just because there's a lot of potential pauses and fail points, so it's going to go pretty quick, but we'll be available for questions afterwards. Hopefully he's got the video.
We're working on it.
That was quick, right? Just went by in an instant.
Are there any questions while we wait for the video to load, maybe? See if anyone has.
Which pipeline, what is your pipeline?
It's
Technology
GitLab. Yeah.
Anything else?
It's hard to say them now before the video.
Yeah. Don't answer too much. Don't want to give too
Right.
much away.
So I made a video to avoid this, the live demo, but
We did test it. You saw us test it
yes,
right before
I did.
this
I
session.
saw it.
You
Yes,
watched
it should work. So
It's the worst when you fail in front of a lot of testers because you're like, oh, this is awkward. But here we go.
okay. Let's see. Is that the right one?
That's just a slide.
Oh, okay. All right. That's the right one. All right. Is it started? Okay. So a developer at USAA has kind of an advantage to get started with GitLab. Yeah, there's actually a slide before this. So we have a utility that we created that's called Blueprint. And so this is a template generator that's going to create all of the files, folder structures, and directories required for their project. Kind of jumped, but so this is when they generate that, it creates a zip file, and then it creates all of these folders. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the most important one, which is the GitLab CI YAML file. This is the file that really dictates what happens in your pipeline execution. This is a stripped down demo file, so we only have 3 stages. We have build, which is like compile, deploy, which is going to deploy your application to your runtime environment, and then we have our validate stage, which is where our ReadyAPI tests are going to execute. So one thing we did in our validate stage is we split out our jobs, our security, functional, and performance separately. You can combine them, and we're probably going to do that as well. The other thing to note that we did, we made our performance tests optional because we recognize that not all projects require performance testing, and performance testing uses a lot of extra resources. So we made that optional. They just have to comment the code out and rebuild it. The other thing we did in reference to performance is we stood up a whole separate GitLab runner to execute our performance tests on. And a runner is like a server where your builds and your deploys are going to execute. And again, we wanted to not collide with any of the builds and deploys that were happening. So that's a good option that you have. So I know I went through this file pretty quickly, but what I want to show you next is what an actual project looks like. So again, using Blueprint to generate all of this template, the only thing different here is we have a simple REST API application that's been configured with some functional security and performance tests in it. So again, you recognize all these files, and so at this point, once you have this is a functioning project that's local, all we would have to do is upload it. If we wanted to make changes to any of these tests, we would just upload it. We would launch ReadyAPI and then upload the project. We'll do that here in a sec. So if you guys have played with ReadyAPI, it's really simple. We just import the project, navigate to the project XML, and then you can see we have our reference app project. And we've got our SOAP functional tests. And then our security test. And then finally, our load test. OK, so at this point, say we wanted to make a change. Say we wanted to extend the time of this load test or change the time of the load test. We make the change locally through the UI. And then we're going to save that project. And then the next step we have to do is we have to push that project up to the remote repository GitLab. We use a tool called Git Bash to do that. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that, but we'll just walk through the basic steps. So the first thing you have to do is do a git status to confirm that you actually made local changes. And you can see our XML comes up in red to show that there were changes to it. And then the next thing we do is we need to add those changes to the package that we're going to push up. So it's just a git add is a wildcard. And then we have to commit the changes. And when you do a commit, you always want to put an identifier, like a little comment, so you can identify your commits when you go up to GitLab, should you need to. And once you do the commit, the next thing we have to do is the push. And the push is the final that pushes those changes that we just made locally up to GitLab. And what that's going to do is automatically execute a pipeline. And we'll see that here in a second. This is the fun graphic stuff. OK, so we can see the pipeline gets kicked off automatically. And if we click on the running box, this is going to show us the different stages that are defined in the YAML file, like I went through really quickly, and then the different jobs that live underneath those stages. And so as they execute, if they complete successfully, you get a green checkbox. And then while they're executing, you'll have a little blue spinner. And you can go into each one of these jobs and see it executing real time. If you want to see your tests executing, that's kind of a nice thing to be able to see. And then as it executes, you'll see all of the different things that are happening runtime. Again, if everything is successful, you will get a job succeeded message. And when you get that, that translates into one of those nice green checkboxes on the visual for the pipeline. And so you see our performance test is running longer. We know that because we defined it to run longer. But when that one is complete, again, if it completes successfully, you get a little checkbox. If it doesn't, you get a little red X, and then you have to go figure out what's going on. OK, so we have a complete, this completes your pipeline execution. It has been successful. The next thing I want to touch on is test results. We have a lot of flexibility here. If you need to just see your test results quickly to validate something, you can see them directly. If you go into the job, you can download the results. They will live on the GitLab runner for up to 24 hours. It's just a kind of a quick way. We'll show you what the reports look like. It's pretty basic. And so you can see the results. We actually built a more automated approach. We built an API so that we can push our results back to the tool that we use for our test case management, and in this case, Qtest. And this was really kind of the final automation piece that we built into the pipeline. So it answers our reporting and our auditing requirements. They all live in one spot now. So that was essentially what I wanted to show you. The other thing I wanted to say was, we're really excited to have ReadyAPI as one of our newest Freeway testing tools. This is our first shot at it. We're doing it in the feature branch. So we're really excited to see where we take it. There's going to be we're going to go up to the master, and we're going to do a lot of other stuff with it. So thank you, and Brian had a few closing remarks.
Yeah, so again, thank you guys so much for letting us speak to you. On my flight over here, I saw this little napkin from one of the airplanes, and it says, "In a world full of no, we're a plane full of yes." And so I think when you look at the Freeway analogy that we utilize, what we strive to be in a world full of no, we're an organization full of yes. Thank you.
Wonderful. We have 5 minutes for questions. Are there any so far? Someone's got to have one. All right, there we go.
Hi, well, I'm the app security guy at Marriott, so I'm interested in, are you saying you generated a test API project that had security tests already in it? Is that what I saw?
Yeah, so what we did for this is what we call our reference app project. So we generated a test, just one of the built-in security tests for ReadyAPI for one of those functional tests.
So ReadyAPI has Secure Pro as part of it, where it will generate security tests. And so we're essentially using that. The other thing we use for security is you can define certain roles within ReadyAPI, and you can test against those. So we'll make sure that the API has been secured and make sure it's secured with the right roles. Is that what you're asking?
Well, I don't know
Okay.
Yeah.
It's part of ReadyAPI.
Yeah, so essentially you can say, I want to run these certain types of tests. So like malformed XML or, XML fuzzing or things like that, where essentially they're kind of default out of the box tests that you can run within ReadyAPI, and you can also tune those to test a certain way. And then, like I said, we overlay that to also have make sure that our APIs are secured not only just, in general, but also with certain roles. So if I, am a user, I can't do admin type functions with the API.
So one other thing I wanted to say just real quick was our load test we set up as a default 5-minute, which if you're a performance tester, that sounds really low. But when we tested one of our applications with it, we actually found a bug within that 5 minutes. We knew that was a valid test. And we're gonna see where it scales from there.
Hi. This is a follow-up question from what the gentleman has asked on security. Actually, we are also trying to implement that. See, one of the things that we have seen is like out of the 10 OAuth security, it covers XPath and SQL injection at this point. Rest other OAuths is not covered. And this is one difficult problem that we are trying to solve because we have the ReadyAPI suite and we wanted to use Secure Pro, but this is one of the contention that we have. So glad to see that you guys are using it, wanted to know more about it.
Yeah, so what I'd say in general, especially with security, right? Security is in layers, so we don't just rely on the ReadyAPI tool. There's also something called static analysis security testing, or SAS, that you can do. So we also overlay it with a SAS tool that also looks at the static analysis. This is more like a dynamic analysis. But like I said, we kind of do layered security approach. So we don't just use this. No. This is just one piece of our larger pipeline that we utilize.
I have a question around, it takes an awful lot of maturity to get an organization to the cultural level that not only that fact that they can bring in anything experimentally. A lot of immature companies, security might have a policy of you can't go to GitHub or you can't download anything.
Yep.
Can you speak to how long it took you to get to this point and what kind of cultural shifts or change you had to go through in that time frame?
Yes. So I think what you're asking is, when we say you can use any tool, that doesn't mean you can download it from the internet. We still have a process that we go through our we have an open source forum essentially that we partner with our legal, security, and other control partners, and then that's when they bring it down. Whereas before, we would only let you use this one framework. We still have a framework where you download new tools, and we make sure it's secure, et cetera. But we're not saying you can't use those tools, whereas in the past we said you can only use this one framework. We still have the process where they have to go through approval, but it typically takes minutes instead of days like it used to use those tools. Does that make sense? So we still want to have the control. We still want to show our regulators we're not using vulnerable open source components, so we still want to utilize that.
Any final questions? We have 1 more minute. Anyone burning, dying? All right, well, from me, SmartBear, thank you so much.